I spend some time in Scotland every summer myself, so I
Oh,
just
good.
just heard Scotland and
Yeah, in Glasgow. So coming from Glasgow, welcome everyone.
cool. I highly recommend the Riverside Museum.
Okay.
If you haven't got there yet, that's a fantastic museum in Glasgow, as well as Kelvin Grove. Fantastic museums.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, we'll get started. This is State Building Code Council IBC Technical Advisory Group for November 6, 2025. Can we please take roll?
Yes, Todd Byrather,
Here.
Roger Haringa,
I am here.
Joe Mayo, Che Fortaleza,
Present.
Tim Woodard,
Present.
Steve Belzak, Lance Dahl,
Present.
Hoyt Jeter,
I'm here. It says Sandy, but that's my wife. But I'm here.
Sean Karlstrom, Todd Sullivan, Bill Mybush, Brian Horseman, Joshua Mergens,
Here.
Trent Tinney, Michael Shaw, Brett Conway, Michael Barth,
I'm here.
Leah Summer, Paul Clark,
Here.
Andy Leonto.
Here.
Okay, so we do have quorum.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosanna. Okay, anyone else like to be recognized today?
Yes, I'm Aaron Scott with Pallet Shelters. We manufacture temporary emergency shelters.
Thank you for joining, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Go ahead, Darren.
And Darren Holmchick, I'm with the city of Bothell, building plans examiner. Thanks.
All right, appreciate you. Thank you. Ardell.
Hi, Ardell Jalla. I'm building official for City of Seattle.
Likewise, thank you. Okay, those are the hands I see. Okay, so we're here to continue on with our discussion or our development of the emergency shelter code. With quorum, let's move into the next agenda item, which is to review and approve this agenda. If we hear a motion to approve, please.
So moved. This is Tim.
Second, this is Josh.
Thank you, Tim and Josh. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. We have 3 sets of minutes, I believe. So Brandon, if you're in control, can you please quickly scroll through? You don't have to take too long on them, but as we're doing that, can we hear a motion to approve all 3 minutes? But we will review each.
This is Tim. I'll move that motion forward of approving the 3 sets of minutes.
Thank you, Tim.
Second.
Thank you, Hoyt. Okay, that's 2. Okay, and this was last week. Okay, anyone pick up any proposed edits? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, with that, the 3 sets of minutes are approved. Okay, and then jumping right into item 4, which is our temporary emergency shelters. Where I remember we left this a couple weeks ago was we were going to invite any potential language, but that includes reviewing what existing language might be out there. And also, I think we have a couple guests that might be able to speak to it. So however the tag would like to proceed today, let's put some ideas out there on first things to discuss. I know definitions were one of them, right? But do we want to start by reviewing the couple examples that were posted? And by review means someone would have to champion talking us through it, please. Okay, I'm not getting any bites here. Go ahead, Josh.
So this might be
Or
a
Nelson.
little out of order, but at the end of our last meeting, I had started throwing together kind of a basic, for lack of a better word, draft table of contents that got posted online. I've added a little bit to that, and I could probably take up time of this whole meeting with all the questions I came up with. And I don't know if that's the most effective use of our time, but if of the people available, that's the best thing that we have to jump off a conversation. I'm happy to pull that up, but knowing we've got some other folks from the public that may have things to say, we might want to let them go first. But if push comes to shove, I can eat time.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think Ardell, you were going to say something, and then I was just going to remind everyone if you're coming in fresh on this. The other thing we're started to populate was the temporary emergency shelter, the topics, kind of like we're approaching the single exit, the multiplex. We're trying to list the topics there, and that seems to be an okay format to work through this a little bit. But Ardell, are you going to say something?
So I have to apologize. I'm just putting it in an email now, so it's not going to give you guys enough time to look at it. So what the city of Seattle has had temporary shelter guidance for that provides relief from full code compliance with a change of occupancy. And we've had it as internal guidance. We've allowed, so I think of it as a pre-approved code modification request. But we don't have it formally adopted. And so to kind of skirt that, what I gave you was the shoreline version of it, which is in effect formally in shoreline and is implemented by their fire marshal as a policy guide document. So if that's one, I'm happy to, Ray's not available. We're actually, several of us are at the WABO meeting right now. So we are, I'm happy to talk through it. It's identical. Like his policy document is identical to the Seattle policy. So I'm happy to walk through that if you want me to, which was
Would
one
you
of
like
the,
me? Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, which was uploaded, was one of the documents uploaded.
I could go grab Ray if you want. Obviously, Ardell and I are here. I could grab him if you want, if anyone wants some questions about their policy.
Well, I think I find it useful when I was reading through it to just look at the structure of that document and also look at the structure of the California appendix, because I think that does help kind of wrap our heads around, scope of work that needs to be maybe discussed and addressed here. So if someone would like to speak a little bit to that, maybe Ardell or others on the shoreline, since we have that up.
And I also just sent you the Seattle version, which I know we haven't had enough time with it. So if you want, but
Brandon,
going
did that
through,
come through or
I just emailed it to you like
Okay.
in this moment. So what this does, it allows for an interim use emergency shelter in an existing building with an operational permit from the Shoreline Fire Department with some limitations on means of egress and operational requirements. So the first section is more around background and identifies sort of the relief that they're offering. Again, shelter facilities don't fit well into residential occupancies. And what you have that's unique to shelters is awake and alert staff. So this explicitly says that those areas are going to be permitted to maintain their existing occupancy designation. So you're not getting a new C of O for a shelter. and that there's flexibility in the code. So it cites, where is this authority given? It's from 1013 and in the existing building code, as well as the RCW, which is referenced, which we talked about last meeting. But if you want to go down a little bit, Dustin, to item 2. Yeah. So it kind of breaks it into, the first part is fire inspector, and for us, it's both the fire and a building inspector, go into the proposed shelter space and are looking at egress. So it's not going to fully comply with the residential occupancy for egress, but we are looking for 2 paths, 2 exits from each sleeping area. I know personally that as I've walked through spaces, if they've got on-grade access, they might not have 2 exits, but they have a window that they can use. It might not meet EERO, but you can egress through that window. I've allowed some flexibility there. So shelters shall be located within 1 level of the ground floor. That's to minimize the travel distance to get to the egress. Exit lighting, exit signage, that's all pretty generally there already. So that's not hard to meet. And it's also not difficult to add, right? I can add bug lights along a path and it's not a huge cost. Exit paths shall not be blocked or locked. And that's a fire department inspection item generally anyway, for most spaces, that this is your egress path. So they're looking for that. The next section is, if you want to, Dustin, please. And I'm only again able to speak to this because we have the same language.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not relative to local enforcement. We'd have to get Ray on the call, but I'm just speaking to the body of this and how it was structured. So the interim use emergency system. So we're talking egress, emergency systems, and operational requirements. So this is the next part, is the emergency systems that are required is carbon monoxide, interconnected smoke. So both of those would have been required in an R occupancy, fire extinguishers, and a posted fire and safety and emergency plan. And then the next part is, and so what's not explicit there is that you need to have sprinklers, right? So what this does, instead of requiring sprinklers or fire alarm, is saying, okay, well, you at least need smoke, so you at least need carbon monoxide, and you need a fire safety plan. And in item 4, this is what you're getting in lieu of is you're getting emergency shelter operators that are awake and alert staff. So you've got a ratio of 1 awake and alert adult for every 25 beds in a shelter facility. And the idea being that I might not have a fire alarm system, but I've got somebody who's awake and alert who can wake up my occupants. Oh, yay. Hey, Ray.
Yeah, he's here to answer questions. So
okay. Ray, I was just walking through the provisions, and if you want to talk about enforcement, I'll just finish out the provisions here. Then it's also written to have awake and alert staff. It's kind of a modified fire watch light, where they're still required to maintain a fire watch log, and walk the facility every 30 minutes. And then the next part is commercial cooking appliances. So these are, right, so you may have a commercial kitchen, right? Because especially in a church, right, they often have commercial kitchen facilities. But this is saying, the idea of the shelter is not to be a cooking facility, and that's where your hazard is, right? And so this kind of limits that you can use a warming oven or residential stovetop, but you're not really using that commercial cooking during sleeping hours. No smoking, no drugs, no. And then this last bit is to, you still have to accommodate disabilities. Some shelter providers do that by sending them to a different facility where they do know they have full accessible access. And then the last part is kind of stating again, what don't we require? It doesn't require fire sprinklers in the sleeping areas. We're not requiring change of occupancy compliance for the HVAC. mechanical systems, and no building envelope. So energy code. Again, these are all things that would trickle down. If you had a change of occupancy, you would be getting mechanical changes, envelope changes, egress, fire sprinklers, fire alarm. And this is allowing an interim use emergency shelter or temporary emergency shelter not to comply with change of occupancy.
That was great. Thank you, Ardell. And welcome, Ray. Ray, many of us know you here, but do you mind for the record stating your name and role, position?
Ray Olshouse, I'm the building official for the city of Shoreline.
Thank you so much for joining.
I hope
Go
you
ahead
didn't
if
mind
you'd
me
like to
going
add
to grab
anything.
them. I hope you didn't
Yeah.
mind me going to grab them real quick. So
Oh, I
Thanks.
think it's great. Ray, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
So that you understand the background of this, it was interesting because we had a number of, or not a number, a selected number of buildings that were available in the city. And I immediately came to light to me that since we had these owners that were interested in providing what was a vacant building for this purpose, they were more than happy, but I didn't want them to be penalized for that, because so if we would have gone through the normal permitting process, this would have been a change of occupancy, as Ardell alluded to. And so that's when I sort of put my heads together with the fire marshal and says, well, let's see if we can do this, or would you agree that we do this as a fire operational permit, and it would be for the express purpose that this is temporary, and therefore it will not affect the certificate of occupancy, the existing certificate of occupancy. And the particular building in question that we first used this on, it was a restaurant that had been not been in use for, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months. And, and of course, and that was because of, COVID or something like that. There was a situation where it just economically it didn't work. Well, I didn't want to penalize them by saying, if we would have converted this to a residential type occupancy, then they came back and they wanted to reopen a restaurant. That would have been another change of occupancy, and we'd have been forced to, or we forced them to, by code, to do upgrades just to put it back to a restaurant. So by doing this, we said this won't affect that certificate, because this is a temporary use, and as long as you can comply with all these requirements, and that basically this would be, in 6-month increments, and that the fire department would be doing, their inspectors would be doing periodic inspections, respond to any concerns or complaints that somebody may have raised about the use. And so the bulk of these requirements, literally the fire department put together, and I supported them, and like we used it at least in 2 or 3 instances. So it's been an effective tool, like I said, for a number of years now.
Thank you, Ray. So I think I'm better understanding so this body of work represents what would be kind of the highest level of a building that was designed at some time under some code. And we're looking for that relief. I think you've used that word well, Ardell. And then in a little bit, we can maybe also look at the California code and the definitions, and understanding then other temporary emergency shelters, tents, so forth, that are different categories. But is that fair to say this is an existing building that was designed under some code, and then we're trying to move forward with that first? Okay.
Yeah, and I do want to give it some context. Ray, this matches our City of Seattle policy, and we, in our version, we kind of give more guidance on when this can be used, number of occupants. I think we talked about that last time. But this was developed about 10 years ago, prior to the pandemic. The regional approach to offering temporary shelter has changed over that time. During the pandemic, we saw shelter providers utilizing existing hotels as emergency shelters. So those are already R1s. They have a pretty clean conversion to an R1 shelter without anything, right? It's already an R1. But post-pandemic, we've got fewer requests for shelters in existing buildings as temporary housing has trended to transitional encampments whether those be tent encampments, tiny house villages, or I know we've got the pallet shelter organization online today. You know, it may be tiny house villages or pallet shelters or some other sort of small dwelling, or I don't want to use dwelling, but small sleeping unit that is also potentially looking for relief from full code compliance because of the emergency nature and the need for transitional housing. So I wanted to offer that sort of context of when this guidance was developed over where we're at today.
And what would we call this category? And then I'll call on Darren and then back to Hoyt. And
I would call it either a limited, we call it a limited use. I think Ray calls it a transit, or sorry.
It's temporary.
Temporary, yeah. We call it limited use. Ray calls it temporary emergency shelter within an existing building.
within existing building, okay. And then I have a question on size and scale, but I think I better call on Darren first, please.
So I really like all the work that's gone into this. It's really thorough and comprehensive. The one question I have is in chapter 1 of the codes under temporary, 180 days or less, and this is 5 years. Isn't there a need either for a definition added, like was just mentioned by Ardell, or a code under administration to put this in up to 5 years for this, because it's not exactly meeting all the requirements of the codes. It's meeting these requirements. So under administration, do we need that added as a definition for temporary for these, because it's more than 180 days?
Anyone like to respond?
I think that we have, yes, Darren, yes, it would be appropriate to put into this appendix the duration, if there is a set time frame for that. Why I'm cautious on it is because land use has kind of removed the limits on how long a transitional encampment can be located somewhere. So I see that 5-year limit is really like relief within an existing building. But again, as the scope changes, I think we need to be sort of cognizant of how this will impact different types of transitional housing.
Yeah,
We've been debating what's temporary over here for a long time. Land use used to cap these as 2 years, and now they don't.
Yeah, just to add on to that for Ardell, City of Tacoma, we've been kind of going through a lot of debates too on that temporary thing. And I don't think there is a direct answer for that. You know, you never know what the disaster is going to be, and this is an emergency shelter. We're meeting, and this is going to give you my opinion from this stuff. We're meeting minimum life safety. We're getting the fire department involved. Rather that, I'm not really sure. I think it should be a case by case basis of how long something. My experience in Turkey, for example, when I went over for the earthquake relief, I mean, complete buildings that people were living in were completely destroyed. They were unlivable. So their temporary shelter was not short term. It was much longer than that. And they had to get in there was cold weather when I was over there. It was not the best, you know, rained a lot, and they got them out into the shelter. So I don't think this should be a special case because it's an emergency shelter, which Ray has developed. It's really not a temporary like you would for anything else in the building code. This is for emergency. And this is a lot of times when an emergency disaster, this could also be used not only after an earthquake, cold weather, for example, or something, it could be used for a lot of different cases. So that's why I'm kind of like, it could be just standalone, is what I'm looking at it, or what I would like it to be.
So could there be a definition added then in chapter 2 of the codes for this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't see why you couldn't add one. I mean,
Okay,
so.
thank you.
And And to everyone here, is it implied or stated that there shall be an emergency declaration? And then if so, isn't it the duration of whatever that declaration is, or am I missing something there?
No, it doesn't have to be an emergency declaration. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, let's say
Cold weather.
cold weather is what I use as an example. You got things down, below freezing, you get below zero or stuff, and there's people on the streets, or there's something you have to have emergency shelters to be in this. This gives a guideline that we could follow. Or what I'm saying, instead of everyone making up their own rules, this is giving a guideline that lays it out. So either smaller jurisdictions or whatever has a path that to be able to follow. And I think it's important. I think minimum life safety, this meets minimum life safety to be able to create something. And that's why we're hoping to get this somehow through the State Building Code Council to get some kind of document like this. So to get approved. So.
Okay, I still have questions on that, but thank you for that, Hoyt. Let's go to Michael, please.
The shoreline policy here, I think it's excellent in addressing this. What I wanted to point out is it does limit essentially to 180-day increments. Number 1E, it is essentially establishes that operational fire permit under the provisions of it being temporary for 180-day increments. Allows it to be extended, but in that way, I think it answers that it's not permanent, and it is for the emergency provisions. I think it's a good base. I really like the way it's done. I like the approach of using it under the fire code with these provisions. So I think Shoreline and Seattle have done a good job putting this together. I think it is a good base for us to use to try to turn this into the statewide policy.
Okay. So simply by applying for a permit based off of some reason, some event, some whatever, that's the basis. Okay. Josh, please.
Yeah, so I just want to kind of bring back a piece of our conversation from last time that I think ties into some of the issues we're discussing here. I don't know if we all officially agreed on this, but there was discussion about having effectively tiers of emergency. So say an immediate emergency, like a seismic event, maybe some, a terror event, or some other immediate unexpected, widespread utility failure that needs something. That being one tier, another tier being something where we have a couple weeks notice. Maybe if we know, like in Hoyt's examples of the inclement weather, we know that there's freezing coming, or we have anticipated flooding, or some other, within a couple weeks notice that maybe has a little more strict requirements. And then something like what we're discussing here, which is more, hey, we have an existing building and we want to use this for a period of time as a building designated to be an emergency structure, so we have something available to use. Some of the questions that are coming up about, okay, well, how long can we have these, and what relief should we or shouldn't we provide? I just wanted to bring back the idea of these different tiers, and that determining how long an exemption would last, what relief may or may not exist. And, if we're moving away from that, that's perfectly fine, but I just wanted to bring that back into the conversation. I think helps close the loop on a couple of these questions.
Thank you, Josh. Ardell?
Just to give some context, and I just sent this to Dustin and Todd, so it'll get posted, I think, for next meeting. But the way what's not in Ray's document is when can you use this rule, right? Interim use emergency shelter can be applied to what, right? What size, what you had just referenced. So for us, if it's a shelter with 20 or fewer beds, they can use this. So what we've had requests for shelters in, teen emergency or teen shelters that are pretty small, in a space that may be their day center, but at night they open their doors and have up to 20 teens coming in the door. Those we we allow them to use this guidance. 50 or fewer beds, we look for limited hours of operation, whether it's overnight only or it's just seasonal. So that seasonal captures the cold weather typically. And then shelters with 50 to 100 beds. So our cap for us for use of this is really 100 beds. If you're under 100 beds and you're very limited duration, whether it's extreme weather or seasonal, then we are, and you have some enhancement, like some of these places are sprinkled, right? So if I think of our shelter providers at the Seattle Armory, that's a sprinkled building. And so that we do allow more beds, but more beds also means more staff, right? So that 100-bed limit at the time this was developed with stakeholder engagement was reasonable. They weren't really looking for having larger shelters than that on an emergency basis, because it's a lot of staff that need to be there that they don't necessarily have. And then beyond 100, we're really looking for a conversion. Like that was our internal cutoff for, how big is too big to say, you really should just change the occupancy. If you're housing more than 100 people, you got, unless it's for like an earthquake situation or something where it's like, nope, we had that during the pandemic where certain places had to open right away to bring people in and had give space. Like those are emergency declarations. And we have other allowances in our CWs and in our codes to respond to emergency situations and make those make even further allowances.
Okay, so that answers my question of declaration versus applying for a permit. Okay, and then 100, can you remind us one more time? That seems reasonable, but again, how is that selected?
That all those things are made up. So
yeah, no, it seems reasonable, and then
20 came
answer.
from a van. We had 16 because I had 8 people and 16 people in a 2 dwellings, but then the shelter providers came back and said, these are 20-person vans. Can we get 20? And so I moved it to 20. 50 came because 50 occupants is throughout the code, right? It goes from B to an A. It goes from, so that's where we got 50. 100, I think there's, I think that came from fire. But 50 to 100, we're looking for something. Give me a fire alarm, give me a fire sprinkler, like give me something else in the building besides just 4 people awake.
Yeah, that was a good answer, Adele. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Josh.
Yeah, so just kind of based on what Ardell was saying and bringing up the number of beds, I wanted to pose to the group, do we think we should be more focused on a number of beds approach to set up tiers, a type or duration of emergency, or some conjunction of the two, which gets maybe more complicated but a little more thorough? I'm particularly interested in folks who have been involved in the enforcement of these things. If we think, like I said, we've talked about a few different forms of tiers. I'm hoping we can start drilling down on what we think those would be.
Well, I can tell you what we've done in Tacoma when I was working with Sue Kaufman. We used 50 also because that was something, door swings, all this other stuff started hitting it up. We kind of thought that was reasonable. I do have to say we based it off of, in the building code, 50 changes a lot of things. So I'm not saying we're right, but when Sue and I were talking, we came to the same conclusion. But a lot of things in the code, some of it's based on science, some of it is based on the amount of people that vote and things like that. So we felt comfortable with that. So.
Okay, do you think the number of beds is a better metric for breaking up the maybe different levels of enforcement we're discussing?
My opinion would be yes. If you put a number of beds, that's just my opinion. I think that would be a fine number, a fine thing to do, because we are using these for people sleeping in, like in the evenings, whatever the disaster is. So they may be there for a little bit of time. So to me, beds would make sense. So
And perhaps that's more easily enforceable than saying the immediacy or duration of a emergency. Anyways, I'll stop taking up time, but I think that's a interesting point as we're circling towards breaking this into chunks that we're filling in with language.
Yeah, I think it's helpful, Josh. We're converging on something here. Let's go to Aaron.
Yes, thank you. So touching on this topic of the duration of emergency, how much foresight, how much warning you have for these type of things, whether it's, an earthquake that hits you all of a sudden, or we know it's going to be really cold this winter. So our shelters are a little bit are different than this. We are not using an existing building. We are setting up a small village of individual units. That takes time. That takes energy, effort to run utilities, electrical, plumbing, all of the systems, ADA ramps, all of that. So on the duration aspect, if we can put our shelters together in a matter of hours and have things up and running. It takes a lot of time to get utilities hooked up. It takes a lot of time to get ADA ramps organized, assembled, set up. And if we're limited to a short amount of time for those to be up, the cost of running all of those utilities, support structures, for a temporary event over the winter, or it becomes an exorbitant cost. So that I think that should be something to be considered on that time frame. Whether something is temporary may refer to the occupancy time that somebody's there, not so much the time that the building is up, right? And additionally, I guess I'm forgetting my next train of thought right there. But yeah, we run into that temporary permanent challenge a lot. People see our shelters are up for more than 180 days, therefore intend to hold us to full energy code, building code, as though it's a brand new house that will be up for generations to come. And usually our sites are on a semi-temporary basis. It's a lot where something is planned. This is where a new police station is going, fire station. This is where something is happening, but it's going to take a couple of years for that to work through the process and get evolved. So on our model type, which is different than this model type, I think there needs to be a distinction between those in these code provisions, and to account for that time frame some way, just separating out that these, to convert a hotel into temporary emergency housing is much less time than it is to set up a village. I assume. I haven't set up hotels, but having that foresight. So to be able to have a time basis on occupancy, not necessarily the time that the structure is up, I think is an important distinction to make with our
Okay.
particular unit types.
Okay, thank you for overlaying that perspective. I'm sensing we're going to have to dedicate time for that category, kind of understand it better, but I think it's valuable to put it in perspective with the existing building consideration. So thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Okay, Tim.
Well, first off, what Aaron said, I think is 100% valid. And I just wanted to make sure that we were understanding what the legislation tasked us to do. If it tasks us to kind of develop rules for all those types of temporary housing, then I feel like they're different conversations. But to speak to Josh's question on the metric we're using, I think I was the one that brought up, duration of time that they were there. I believe I was. But this bed concept, I think can be a valid, quick way to do an analysis, right? I mean, that is the hazard, is how many people we're putting into these structures. So I think the bed way of doing it is a quicker, more effective broach at how we're going to look at these structures. So again, to speak to Josh's comment, I think that's the tiers that we should set this existing building provisions to, and then again, separate conversation if we need to address, you know, the pallet housing or the other tiny home structures.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Is that if we were to put something down, we're gonna have to go back and update the spreadsheet. Is that what we're marking on right now? 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 plus? Those are kind of three different tiers, categories of consideration on these existing. We don't have to do it right now, but is that if we were to mark our conversation today, that's where we are?
I think you should also consider not putting any limits, and it's up to the local to decide when or when not these provisions can or cannot be used.
Okay. How would you? I think you've
It
done
would
a
look
good
like
job so
it would
far.
look like shorelines. There's no guidance.
You think that's captured now? Okay.
Yeah, I think it doesn't say when you can use it. It just says you can apply for it. It is then up to the AHJ to walk through the site and say yay or nay, this can qualify based on whatever emergency declaration is or however the proposal is for the program moving forward. That's one path. The legislation doesn't say you have to define when it can be used. It just says what are the technical requirements for use for relief, I think is one way to think of it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ardell. Darren. By the way, so we have about 15 minutes left. Do we want to use the 15 minutes, kind of keep this conversation going? I think it's healthy. Okay, Darren.
So one more question in Senate Bill 5553. It says exempts any deficiencies exempted pose no threat to human life, health, and safety. So health, the plumbing code is a health code in chapter 2902, table 2902, the IBC says how many plumbing fixtures you have to have. So basically, if people are sleeping there, it becomes a residential occupancy, which is a higher number of fixtures. Is that figured into this at all for sanitation? Because that is a health code, and this part of the building code is a health code. So that's not exempt according to this Senate Bill 5553. There has to be enough sanitation for people that are there, not Sanitans, because it says up to 5 years they could be there. So I just want to throw that out there.
Anyone have a quick response?
Yeah, I do
couple-
do that. I do that actually. I actually kind of disagree with that. From some disasters, they could be a little bit longer. And I do think if you have access to like Santa cans, they also have them for people in wheelchairs that have access. In the disasters that I've actually had experience for that's lasted a while, they seem to perform fine. If you could put a Santa can in there, you have to be able to get it delivered. You also got to be able to, as a building official there, making sure it's getting service and stuff like that. I don't see an problem with that. In addition, they have stuff for like portable showers that could be put in, things like that. I think that's where it comes to the building officials, gets to make some of those decisions. And I think the way this document, the shoreline is laid out, kind of gives you that situation to be able to meet some of those things. So, I do believe you should be able to give reliefs for like water closets and stuff, being able to use a Santa can. So
should that be captured then? That a
Yeah.
number of
I think it should be left up. You could capture it, but I also think it's one of those things you could leave up to the building official. It's, one of the places it's there. I guess
You could say though that that plumbing facility, minimum plumbing fixtures are required, and just reference to chapter 29, and then it's up to the building official to locally provide relief. Again, because it's not a permanent change of occupancy, that's how we've looked at it.
It's a great idea.
Personally, is that because it's not a change of occupancy, the minimum fixture requirement is presumably already met with the existing occupancy for the existing occupancy. When they don't have enough fixtures for the number of beds that they are proposing, we often will see them just come in. It's sort of a self-regulated thing where they're, you know, if they've got something that's going to stay a little longer, they don't want to set themselves up to not have plumbing fixtures. In my full defense too, at the time this was written, King County was doing our plumbing fixture calcs, our plumbing fixture requirements, and so those would get hit. Same thing on the encampments; those do get minimum plumbing fixtures, and they do meet those with trailers or Santa-Cans, or generally they're trailers today.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, let's go back to Josh and then Che.
All right, I've got a little much, so maybe I'll just start with one question because I've got responses to 4 different comments and I want Jay to have a chance to go. So real quick, Aaron, could you, Aaron Scott, if you're still on, would you be willing to share with us what the typical situations that the pallet structures are typically responding to, or if they're more preparatory for expected situations and emergencies? That just kind of helps frame how we would place villages, whether it's pallet shelters or tiny homes, into this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Typically, our villages have been used to address homelessness. At this point, jurisdictions have a pretty good visibility on the homelessness situation in their location. So they have a little bit of time to set these up, coordinate with service providers for, you know, addiction service, job placement, mental health, physical health, to coordinate all of that to best fit their particular needs. With how quickly our units are put together, we've been getting a lot of questions from places for very quick emergency deployments. For example, we had folks in Jamaica reaching out just last week. You know, very huge hurricane went through there. How quickly can you get us how many units, and how quickly can we get those put up? Can we put them in people's driveways? So there's kind of 2 situations where our model comes into play. One is kind of a you know, more well-known or a more visible situation of homelessness to help get people off of the streets, interim housing, and then moved into permanent housing. I believe our average residence time is about 9 months before somebody moves into a permanent house out of our villages on a nationwide average. And the second would be very quick emergency response for something like Cascadia earthquake. You know, takes a lot of houses out of operation. How could we get units placed in, say, people's driveways? You know, try to get 1,000 of them out a day, placed in people's driveways so they have somewhere to sleep that's not the Nathan Hale gym, while their house is evaluated for the structural cracking of the chimney or broken windows to ensure that the house is habitable to move back into. Or while those kind of shorter term repairs are happening, so that they can move back into that permanent house and still live at their lot, and do this in a way that does not take up efforts of emergency responders doing other things. You know, people, sewer systems, plumbing systems down, plumbers need to be fixing those. They don't need to be digging a trench to hook a sewer into the mainline sewer system. You know, we can use a tank. We can use a Santa-Can, something like that. So provisions to help them, you know, very quickly deploy for emergency situations, and then broader for more well-known homelessness type situations. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. And it does, unless anyone disagrees, it does seem like then we should have another discussion about that category and see if it's a fit within the legislation. I think it is, but I think it deserves its own dedicated time, maybe in 2 weeks if that's on our schedule. It's probably Thanksgiving, but you know what I mean. Okay, thank you for that. Che.
Yeah, yes, I agree, and it's good to hear different perspectives on this. I agree that each needs some time of dedicated analysis and evaluation, but we need to also be go back to the RCW and the ask, and what we're trying to establish here in this tag is to set standards for temporary emergency shelters for building code adoption, which would normally, start with your small multifamily buildings. And also this pertains to buildings that are already existing. So no new construction or anything any additions that are required to make one an emergency shelter. So going back to what Josh said, I agree on setting tiers on the types of disaster that these emergency shelters will be used for, and considering that these are existing buildings, we need to, on the declaration, we need to establish what the main purpose of the building is. And what the main use is, what that pertains to the occupancy that it's currently listed as. So that is important. And then when the duration, when this building becomes an emergency shelter, how long can it be used? Is it just an overnight thing where in the morning or on Sunday it becomes a church again or something like that? Or if it's the arena, is it when there's a game, does it go back to being to holding sports events? Or I mean, what sorts of disasters and what length to what length does it stay as an emergency shelter?
Okay, thank you, Che. Josh, why don't you go, and then I think I'll try to answer or ask a couple of questions so we can get firm direction for the staff and council on what to develop for the next couple of weeks. So go ahead, Josh.
Sure, and I'll be a little quicker than I have in the notes here and save some of this for later. Some of the conversations that we've talked about with allowing building officials some more flexibility and what do we need to state and what don't we need to state. I think Che makes a good point that we are called by the RCW to put forth standards, but I would suggest, because of the unpredictable nature of these kind of events, that maybe the right way to handle it is we put forth some provisions that are maybe a hair more conservative than we think applies everywhere, but include obvious extensions and alternative submittals approved by building official. I mean, realistically, that's kind of in the IBC already, but IBC says, hey, you have to be interpreting a section of code and it needs to meet the intent of the IBC, et cetera. And maybe we need a provision that's saying, hey, and a building official can approve extensions on time limit because we don't know how long a disaster will last. Building officials can approve alternative submittals or relief that is outside of the standard, but still providing some initial standard that people can base things off of to have a bar to work from, but allow explicit exceptions from the building official. So we kind of get the best of both worlds. We make sure we meet the legislative intent of providing a standard, but we also don't box ourselves into situations that could negatively impact life safety.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Okay, I think the question right now, and that's helpful, is to move forward, is there anyone that disagrees with the direction we've talked about today, that this would be a good base language, and one, we need to populate our issues list, but probably more importantly, like we talked about last time, we need to get it into actual Washington code. Again, I think our mandate and the reason we're in the IBC tag is that this is IBC language. Anyone have suggestion how we pull that in? Do we pull that in under IBC, obviously referencing IFC section here? Is that a good first step? And then that allows others to also propose amendments to this base.
You know, one thing, just so here, you know, you're saying an IBC language. You know, to me, this would be like an appendix of the IBC. You know, so
Okay.
you'd label it as an appendix. The nice thing about an appendix is that gives some leeway to jurisdictions or people like that, how they adopt it and stuff like that, compared to actually in the model of the code. So I just thought I'd add that out. Appendix would be a good way to, because, you know, you look at Seattle, you look at Bellevue, you look at Tacoma, we're pretty well organized in a lot of ways in these things because we deal with that. But you start looking at other locations around, the appendix would be a good guideline for building officials too, how they adopt it. That's just something I was thinking on, so.
That's kind of where my mind is too, Hoyt, and I assume maybe others thinking that way. Josh, and then Tim.
Yeah, I agree with Hoyt. I would throw the one caveat that I think this document is an excellent place to start for this particular circumstance. And we've talked about circumstances beyond what this document covers. Another one I was looking at from SDCI is tip 136, which gets into the villages a little bit and spacing between those tiny home or pallet shelter, or whatever shelter units, and a little bit more of the site requirements. I think I have not had the chance to read this whole document, but I think that's outside of what we're looking at right now that would also need to be included. And if we were including things for, and I don't know if we've decided this, but tent shelters or other, you know, tent cities, things like that, any of those kinds of shelters that may be outside of this document, but I think this is an excellent place for us to start for the predominant situation of we have an existing building we're trying to use without changing occupancy. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to come up on time here. I'm going to recognize hands. And we did not talk about the California code, which reads to me more like an appendix. And so maybe we need to do that next time, but also try to move forward on getting this into a language. Let's go to Tim.
I was just going to reference what you talked about as far as this being an IFC provision, but we're tasked with putting this in the IBC. I think we're just going to have to do references to the operational permit, and you know, we're going to end up with some fire-like regulations in this appendix that we're discussing. But it will have to reference that operational permit from the fire department for the enforcement of it.
Okay, so yeah, that's what it feels like, right? And everyone's okay with that approach for now. I think that makes sense. Okay, thank you, Tim. Che.
Yes, another place to consider this on is Chapter 4, Special Detailed Requirements, and it should also follow the organization of the code in terms of, you know, definition, occupancy, fire and smoke protection, egress, accessibility, like that in that manner.
Che, are you saying that even if we put this in an appendix, there's still going to be some sections that might need to be touched?
That it needs to follow the organization of the code.
Are you advocating for pure integration and not appendix, or?
It can be either or. Appendix is fine, but it can also be, like I said, it can also be in Chapter 4 or an appendix. But wherever we end up putting that, then it still needs to follow the organization of the code.
Okay.
Is my recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Che. We'll keep thinking on that. Aaron.
Yes, I'll be quick here. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate that, yes, I believe our village model is a bit different than this, and this type of code doesn't quite apply to the type of shelters that we build and are used throughout the country. The California Appendix P, or I believe it's Q, they relabeled it, has been quite successful in California. Another code that I have seen that seems fairly appropriate for our type of model would be the ANSI A119.5 park model RVs, which are not full permanent building, therefore, seasonal or semi-temporary occupancy, not full permanent building provisions.
Okay. Yeah, I agree, Aaron, and I think we're committing to, we'll dedicate time on the next time around on this topic, which won't be the next week's, because next week we'll go back to dwelling units, to my understanding, and then we'll come back to emergency shelter. So
Okay,
agreed with that.
wonderful.
Thank you for that. Okay, Ardell.
Again, I can't stress this enough. We've used this a lot in the past. I haven't had any come in. I've had like one come in the past year using this, the provisions of this. I probably did 20 in 10 years ago. We need to get shelter providers in here to talk about what the needs are today. And we're then my other suggestion is relative to pellet shelters. Aaron, I know our issue has been they do fall in between right now, and especially that they're an L&I regulated, factory manufactured. So I think we need to get L&I into that meeting when we have that discussion, please.
Okay, we'll do that, Ardell. Thank you. Any response there, Aaron?
Oh, sorry, my hand was still up. Quickly, yes. When we've gone through L&I frequently, they have pushed it onto a city permitting, since our buildings are fully inspectable on site, panelized but assembled on site, fully inspectable. There's nothing done in the factory that's hidden, so they've frequently handed that responsibility off to the local inspectors to inspect that construction.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll bring him in, bring him to the table here and get it into our process. Okay, and then Brandon.
Are we looking to extend?
No, I think unless anyone else is opposed, I think we should stick to an hour and thank everyone for your time. Okay, good meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.